Feeling overwhelmed, stressed, like life's moving too fast? Take a breath, take 5 minutes, and take stock of all you have to be grateful for. I'm Olivia, and I invite you to join me for 5 Minutes of Gratitude, the podcast that transforms your outlook in the time it takes to drink your morning coffee. Together, we'll explore the power of thankfulness. From life's big blessings to its smallest joys, we'll discover how gratitude can change everything. 5 Minutes of Gratitude, because a thankful heart is a happy heart. Follow 5 Minutes of Gratitude now, wherever you get your podcasts, and let's start our gratitude journey together.
Tired of doom scrolling? Time for a dose of awesome. 5 Good News Stories is your happy place, where underdogs become champions, crossing guards become legends, and impossible dreams come true. We're serving up 5 fresh reasons to believe in humanity. From world records to cute animal stories to that guy who turned his pizza shop into a homeless shelter. These are the stories that'll make you go, wait, what? That's amazing! Ready for your good news fix? Follow 5 Good News Stories wherever you get your podcasts, because let's face it, we could all use more awesome in our lives. The number 5 Good News Stories.
Calaroga Shark Media.
On September 29th, 1978, the world awoke to shocking news. Pope John Paul I, elected just 33 days earlier, was dead, found in his bed, still wearing his reading glasses. A collection of papers scattered across his lap. The man who had captivated Catholics and non-Catholics alike with his warm smile and humble demeanor was gone before most people had even gotten to know him. The brevity of his papacy has often overshadowed its significance, but in those 33 days, Albino Luciani, the man who reluctantly became Pope John Paul I, initiated changes that threatened centuries of Vatican tradition. His sudden death cut short what many believed would have been a transformative papacy. This is the story of those 33 days, of a humble priest who never wanted to be pope, whose radical simplicity challenged the very foundations of papal authority, and whose unexpected death would spawn decades of conspiracy theories and unanswered questions. This is White Smoke, Episode 5, 33 Days. August 26th, 1978. 111 cardinals had gathered in the Sistine Chapel for the Second Conclave of 1978. Just weeks earlier, they had elected Paul VI's successor, but now they faced the rare task of choosing another pope in the same year. Cardinal Albino Luciani, the 65-year-old Patriarch of Venice, sat among them. The son of a bricklayer from Italy's impoverished north, Luciani had never expected to be considered for the papacy. He hadn't spent years in the Vatican diplomatic corps or served in the Roman Curia. He was, in his own estimation, a simple parish priest who happened to have been made a bishop, then a cardinal. When asked in an interview before the conclave if he might be elected pope, Luciani had laughed and said, "I'm not on any list, I'm at peace." Journalist Marco Politi, who covered the Vatican for decades, described the atmosphere that August. There was a sense that the church needed something new. Paul VI had been an intellectual pope, brilliant but distant. The cardinals were looking for someone who could communicate with ordinary people, who could bring warmth back to the papacy. After the death of Paul VI on August 6th, the College of Cardinals was deeply divided. Progressive cardinals wanted someone who would continue implementing the reforms of the Second Vatican Council. Conservatives sought a pope who would restore tradition and authority. No obvious candidate united both factions. By the fourth ballot on August 26th, a surprise consensus emerged around the unassuming Cardinal Luciani. At 5:45 in the evening, white smoke rose from the chimney of the Sistine Chapel, signaling that a new pope had been elected. Inside the chapel, Cardinal Pericles Felici asked Luciani the traditional question, "Do you accept your canonical election as Supreme Pontiff?" Those present would later recall that Luciani hesitated, his face showing genuine shock. After a long pause, he responded in Latin, "May God forgive you for what you have done in my regard. I accept." When asked what name he would take, Luciani again broke with tradition. For the first time in history, a pope chose a double name, John Paul I, honouring his two predecessors, John the 23rd and Paul VI. Sister Margarita Marin, a nun who worked in the papal apartments, would later recall, "When he was elected, we all watched on television. We saw his face appear on the balcony. He looked terrified, but there was such kindness in his eyes. We knew immediately this would be a different kind of pope." From his first appearance on the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica, Pope John Paul I signalled that his papacy would be unlike any other in modern history. As he stepped out to greet the crowd, he smiled broadly, an expression so rare among his predecessors that Italian newspapers immediately dubbed him the Smiling Pope. One author called it a revolution in papal style. Everything about him broke with tradition. He refused to be carried on the sedia gestatoria, the papal throne. He wouldn't wear the triple tiara. He spoke in the first person, saying "I" instead of the royal "we." These might seem like small changes, but in the Vatican, where tradition is everything, they were earthquakes. The day after his election, John Paul I delivered his first Angelus address, breaking with centuries of formal papal rhetoric. He spoke in simple language, even sharing an anecdote about a conversation with a young boy. The crowd in St. Peter's Square was delighted by this accessible style. Within days, the new pope had abandoned numerous traditional elements of papal protocol. He refused to be crowned with the papal tiara, opting instead for a simple installation ceremony. He declined to use the papal throne during audiences. And perhaps most shocking to Vatican traditionalists, he spoke to people directly, without the formal, distancing language that had characterized papal communications for centuries. This accessibility extended to his private audiences as well. Dignitaries accustomed to formal papal protocol were startled when this pope would stand to greet them, engage them in casual conversation, and even joke with them. During an audience with UN Secretary General Kurt Waldheim, John Paul shocked his Vatican handlers by standing up from his chair to greet Waldheim as an equal. When a group of bishops came for their ad limina visit, he insisted they call him by his baptismal name, Albino, rather than Your Holiness. This rejection of papal pageantry wasn't merely stylistic, it reflected a deeper theological vision. Luciani had been profoundly influenced by the Second Vatican Council's emphasis on the Church as the people of God, rather than a rigid hierarchy. As Pope, he saw an opportunity to embody this vision by stripping away the monarchical trappings that separated the papacy from ordinary Catholics. Behind the warmth and simplicity that captivated the public, John Paul I was developing an ambitious agenda for reform. In the privacy of his papal apartment, he worked late into the night, typing notes for speeches and writing down ideas for changes he hoped to implement. John Paul's vision for reform touched several key areas. First was a reorganization of the Vatican Curia, the central governing body of the Catholic Church. He planned to replace key conservative officials with more pastoral-minded bishops who shared his vision of a simpler, more accessible church. Within days of his election, he had already signalled his intention to reform Vatican finances. He appointed a commission to review the operations of the Vatican Bank, which had been plagued by allegations of improper dealings. According to John Meiji, one of his papal secretaries, the Pope was particularly concerned about connections between the Vatican Bank and certain questionable financial institutions. Another area of planned reform was the Church's teaching on contraception. While John Paul I had publicly supported Paul VI's encyclical Humanae Vitae, which reaffirmed the ban on artificial contraception, private writings discovered after his death suggest he was reconsidering this position. In 1973, as Cardinal of Venice, Luciani had written a note to himself following a meeting with a large Catholic family struggling with poverty. The principle is undoubtedly valid, but applying it is another matter. I'm seeking a middle way.
Hello, it is Ryan, and I was on a flight the other day playing one of my favorite social spin slot games on chumbacasino.com. I looked over at the person sitting next to me, and you know what they were doing? They were also playing Chumba Casino. Coincidence? I think not. Everybody's loving having fun with it. Chumba Casino is home to hundreds of casino-style games that you can play for free anytime, anywhere, even at 30,000 feet. So sign up now at chumbacasino.com to claim your free welcome bonus. That's chumbacasino.com and live the Chumba life.
No purchase necessary. VGW. Void where prohibited by law. See terms and conditions. 18+.
Perhaps most significantly, John Paul I envisioned a more collegial governance of the Church, with greater involvement of bishops from around the world in decision-making processes. He spoke of establishing regional synods with real authority and giving national bishops' conferences more autonomy. These planned reforms generated both excitement and alarm within the Vatican. Progressive cardinals saw John Paul I as the Pope who would finally fulfill the promise of the Second Vatican Council. Conservative elements viewed his ideas with growing concern. The word on the street about the new Pope was, he wants to change too much, too quickly. As August turned to September in 1978, Pope John Paul I settled into a rhythm of work that alarmed his closest aides. Rising before 5 each morning, he would pray for 2 hours before celebrating Mass. The rest of his day was filled with audiences, meetings and paperwork, often continuing until late at night. Dr. Renato Buzzonetti, the Vatican physician who examined the Pope shortly after his election, had advised him to rest more and warned about his low blood pressure. But John Paul, driven by the urgency of his mission, rarely heeded this advice. By late September, those closest to the Pope noticed signs of fatigue. During his general audience on September 27th, observers noted that his voice seemed weaker than usual. That evening, he complained of not feeling well, but insisted on continuing his work. On September 28th, what would be the final day of his life, John Paul I kept a full schedule. In the morning, he met with Bishop Pio Laghi, who had been appointed apostolic delegate to the United States. Later, he received the foreign minister of Iraq and 4 Filipino bishops. In the afternoon, he worked on a speech he planned to deliver at the University of Rome. The speech, found on his desk after his death, included these lines: "We are all called to build a better world, where justice and love prevail. The Church must lead by example, not by power." That evening, he spoke by telephone with Cardinal Giovanni Colombo of Milan about upcoming appointments to the Curia. According to Colombo, the Pope sounded tired but determined. At approximately 9 p.m., John Paul retired to his bedroom. He took with him several folders containing documents related to Vatican appointments and a copy of The Imitation of Christ, a spiritual classic he read daily. What happened in the next several hours remains the subject of intense debate and speculation. According to the official Vatican account, at approximately 5:30 a.m. on September 29th, Sister Vincenza brought coffee to the Pope's door as she did each morning. When he didn't respond to her knock, she became concerned. Upon entering, she found him sitting up in bed, his reading glasses on, papers scattered around him. He was dead. The official cause of death was listed as sudden death from a myocardial infarction, a heart attack. No autopsy was performed, as Vatican law prohibited it. Within hours, the body was embalmed, preventing any later examination that might have clarified the circumstances of his death. The funeral of Pope John Paul I was held on October 4th, 1978, in St. Peter's Square. Despite heavy rain, thousands gathered to bid farewell to the smiling Pope, who had touched so many in such a brief time. Cardinal Carlo Confalonieri, who delivered the homily, described John Paul as a meteor that lights up the sky and then disappears, leaving us amazed and astonished. In the decades since his death, John Paul I's legacy has been largely overshadowed by his successor, John Paul II, whose nearly 27-year pontificate would transform the modern papacy. Yet the questions surrounding Albino Luciani's 33 days as Pope, and particularly the circumstances of his death, have never fully disappeared. Was his death simply the result of natural causes, a man with low blood pressure and a family history of heart problems succumbing to the immense stress of the papacy? Or was there something more sinister at work? The contradictions in the official account, from who discovered the body to the precise time of death, the rushed embalming, the absence of an autopsy, have fueled decades of speculation and conspiracy theories. What is certain is that with John Paul I's death, a unique moment in Catholic history came to an abrupt end. His vision of a simpler, more humble papacy closer to the people would not be fully realized. The reforms he had planned to Vatican finances, church governance, and possibly even moral teaching would remain largely unimplemented. What remains of those 33 days is the memory of a gentle, smiling Pope who, however briefly, showed the world a different face of the Catholic Church, and whose sudden death would give rise to one of the great mysteries of modern Vatican history. In our next episode, The Morning They Found Him, we will examine the events of September 29th, 1978, in minute detail, exploring the contradictory accounts of who discovered the Pope's body, why there was no autopsy, and how the Vatican handled information in those crucial first hours after his death was discovered. This has been a production of Calaroga Shark Media, portions of which were made with the help of AI narration.
Ryan Seacrest here. When you have a busy schedule, it's important to maximize your downtime. One of the best ways to do that is by going to ChumbaCasino.com. Chumba Casino has all your favorite social casino games like spin slots, bingo, and solitaire that you can play for free for a chance to redeem some serious prizes. So hop on to ChumbaCasino.com now and live the Chumba life. Sponsored by Chumba Casino.